Welcome in, everybody, to the best in true crime podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm Tim Dennis. Got a wonderful show for you today. Starting a little late today because of the holiday weekend. We apologize for that, but I am more than making up for it for you. I read an extremely interesting book over the weekend, and boy, we're gonna sit down with the author today, and we're gonna chop it up. And folks, I'm telling you, you're gonna want to copy this book by the time we're done. The book is called Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys Surviving Brooklyn's Colombo Mob. Craig McGuire is our guest. Let me tell you a little bit about Craig. He is a published author. Most recently, this book that we're talking about, it hit number one on Amazon's bestseller status in the biographies and memoirs of criminals category right away. Craig is also the author of Brooklyn's Most Wanted, the top 100 criminals, crooks, and creeps from the county of Kings, and beyond the Ides, why March is the unluckiest month of all. That would be interesting to talk about in itself. A frequent speaker and podcast guest, Craig has been a successful writer, editor, designer, photographer, community reporter, new media journalist, and content creator for the last 30 years. Craig has also overseen content development for all different types of media, from web portals to newsletters to social media programs. Partial list of titles include Institutional Investor Magazine, InternetNews.com, Irish America, The Real Deal, Digital Media Buzz, Wall Street and Technology, PR Week, At Night Media, and more. And coming soon, Craig is currently working on a screenplay based on a true story involving a bizarre crime in South Brooklyn in the late 1980s. More details will be available shortly on that. Let's welcome to True Crime Tuesday, Craig McGuire. Craig, welcome in, my friend. To True
Hey,
Crime
Tim,
Tuesday. How
are you? Thanks for having me on the show.
Doing great, man. I tell you, I was absorbed by this book, and it's hard to get me absorbed into a book. But this man had... I'll tell you, the subject of our book here is Carmine has got me intrigued about his life in general. And it was a short life in the mob. I mean, born in 1957, obviously, and we'll go through his biography in a minute. I've got some general questions about the era of Brooklyn in which we're talking about here. But, man, I tell you, I talk about the level of absorption here, and I want to get to a point here. But I tell you, Craig, I'm kind of caught up in just not just the era of Brooklyn that we're covering here, but the fact that when we talk about real mob culture versus movie mob culture, it's really quite different, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Interestingly enough, Carmine was born in 1957, and historians mark that as the end of Brooklyn's golden age. Mm-hmm. So moving from the 60s into the 70s with the economic issues with the city, you sort of saw a downturn. The neighborhood got a little rougher around the edges. It was a perfect, incubator for young men, disillusioned men. Carmine was a high school dropout. But a very popular guy, tough kid. And at this time on 13th Avenue, you had all five of the Italian organized crime families operating, but it was the Colombo stronghold. So you had this neighborhood culture, this insular neighborhood culture, meeting this mob culture. And it was just like the perfect incubator to produce this really brutal landscape that Carmine got caught up in very, very quickly. This is really a collection of Carmine Imbriale stories. So it was just from the very first conversation I had with Carmine, very intriguing. He's a tough guy, but he's a very charismatic guy, very amiable, easy to get along with. Just really pulls you in with these remarkable stories that have kind of twists and turns in them, and at the same time, From very young, he was a bookmaker. He was dealing football sheets at a time. This was pre-legalized gambling at a time when they still did before the lotto. There's a good section there about the numbers, the Italian street lottery, and it was just such a sprawling landscape. Along 13th Avenue, you had a dozen clubs, mm-hmm. and then within a 2-mile radius, you had some of these, infamous mob clubs for the Gambinos, for the Colombos. And, at any given time, thousands of these guys floating in and out of these clubs, doing all different types of scams. So it was a wild ride just to sit there and listen about it. And I hope I did him justice with the stories.
I believe you did. I want to rewind a little bit here, though, Craig. In that, when we started out in 1957, it seems like Brooklyn at the time is a neighborhood that's turning. You mentioned in the book that Brooklyn at this time is a place where it's still relatively safe. We don't think of it being a big deal at this time to be able to take the subway and not worry about your life or your possessions, or being able to hop a train and have to worry about being jumped.
Yes. If you think about Brooklyn, it's a tapestry of all different neighborhoods. And some of the South Brooklyn neighborhoods, like Bensonhurst, Dyker Heights, Fort Hamilton, they're more residential. So there's a little bit more stability there than you have in some of the more commercial districts, like down in the Gowanus and Coney Island. And there was a lawlessness there. There was, especially as drugs started to creep in. There's some fascinating stories. Carmine was a young player in the Brooklyn Concrete Tackle League. So they used to play, and I remember this when I was a kid because I grew up in the area. And they used to play tackle football on asphalt. So it was pretty fascinating.
Which made me hurt just reading this, because I played football for years, and to think that you would actually play football on a concrete slab made me hurt just reading it. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Please do. Yeah. It's just, sometimes it's these stories are just so easy to jump in on. But then, so when he was playing, he was of the younger generation, and then he had older brothers and friends. And again, it was a very insular community. Everybody was out playing in the street. It was still part of stoop culture, still playing stickball. Stickball leagues were still very popular. You had the Italian street festivals and the fairs. And then I interviewed some of the older guys, and they talked about how you had, especially around this time, the 70s, more drugs were coming into the neighborhood. So, and the combination of that and the economic downturn, was harder to get jobs. It was just a little tighter. So it became a darker landscape. And this is just the type of environment Carmine was coming of age.
Now, you and I had talked before the show. You grew up in the Brooklyn area. And you would, obviously you're doing well for yourself. You're an author. You didn't go down that road. And so I don't hesitate to ask the question at all, but there's that fine line, there's people you stay away from in the neighborhood. There's people if you get mixed up with, you may go down that road. So talk to me a little bit here, for a second here, about what it is that fine line, and what keeps you on the straight and narrow, and what takes you down that dark path.
Great question. For context, I was born in 71. Carmine was born in 57. Mm-hmm. And he actually grew up, I grew up within a half mile of each other. We actually went to the same elementary school, which is pretty interesting. Huh. And it hadn't changed much, PS 204. I'm by no means a tough guy. I'm not a wise guy, gangster. I wasn't ever involved with that. Just regular neighborhood kid. But one thing we bring up in the book is the neighborhood is so dense and it's so packed, and it's so communal. That so many people, everybody knows somebody who's involved in the rackets, whether it was playing the numbers or the guy in the corner. There used to be OTBs all over the place, off-track betting. So there's a lot of gambling in the neighborhood, all over the place. You knew where the card game was. You knew where the dice game was. You didn't go there. It also wasn't. It was a lawlessness, but it was also it wasn't that much a depraved scene. There was some kind of structure. A lot of people, until the 80s, really the 80s came, and then there was a lot more cocaine involved. Mm-hmm. There was a lot more heavier drugs, a lot more junkies. It wasn't as bad as it was in some of the like the South Bronx neighborhoods that you have, but it still was a pretty dark place. A lot I attributed to drugs. But they were also there. I was fortunate enough to have, a strong family, strong support network. And Carmine did as well. That's one of the distinctions of Carmine's life path. Mm-hmm. He always had a strong family. Had the love of his wife, who was with him throughout thick and thin. His kids, and that's pretty rare when you see in the rackets. Their personal lives, tend to unravel. Integrity was a big thing with Carmine. And it's kind of, sometimes it seems counterintuitive, but then when you think about it, I mean, when you're dealing with criminals, there has to be some level of trust involved. And when you violate this trust, then, that's bad business all around. So there was a lot of it in the neighborhood. But there's also a lot of opportunity too. Living in South Brooklyn is still part of New York City. It's part of the center of the world. Yeah. So there was a lot of opportunity for young kids.
And you've brought up a lot of good points here, Craig. I mean, you can only forge so many excuses. Okay. So if it's not the family life, because let's face it, Carmine had a strong family background. I mean, you talk in the book about how his father was right on top of him. If he did something, nothing was ever good enough for his father, one. You talk about how when he was playing in that concrete football league, which makes my knees and my back hurt thinking about it right now. But he'd score 4 touchdowns in a game. And it was, why didn't you score 5? He had the opportunity to score 5. Why didn't you score 5? Or, if he made a mistake, well, his father was all over him like white on rice, right? So dad was hard on him, but he was there. There's a lot of mobsters that could say, well, dad wasn't there, and that's why they were in the mob, because it was family. So there's excuse number 1 thrown out the door. Family was there, so he can't blame it on family. There's other motivations as well. Well, we really grew up poor, but we didn't have much. Well, it seems like both mom and dad were working so that they could at least try to provide some sort of life. So I don't know that you can really blame that, because mom and dad were trying. I mean, sure, they didn't have much, but mom and dad were trying. So I don't know that you can really use that either. I mean, it seems like the whole family were go-getters, right?
Yes. And Carmine is too, in his own way. Remember, he dropped out of New York High School, but he was very capable and he was very useful. He's highly intelligent. He's very charismatic. He has a lot of the people skills that he could have been very, very successful in business. It just happened to be the landscape he was involved with. And it was a slow, gradual roll into organized crime. He didn't become, a street level associate for the Colombos overnight. He actually started very young. He was a valet at Pastel's nightclub, which is this famous, South Brooklyn nightclub that was just a magnet for young organized crime guys. And he was standing outside parking their cars. So that visibility there, he's a good looking guy. And he was in a lot of fights. Everyone I talked to seemed to have some kind of crazy story about a fight that Carmine was involved with. And then everybody would come out and they would watch these fights. And it was like you could just envision this like Hollywood scene unfolding, right? And then there was a great story that we talked about with Tommy Dades. Detective Tommy Dades, is the one who introduced me to Carmine, about Carmine fighting this young boxer to a standstill, and then afterwards going up and shaking his hands. And that was kind of unheard of. It was like after a fight, but because he had this kind of integrity about him. And then people pick up on that because it's Brooklyn has an edge to it, and it's very visceral. It's very in your face. It's actions that turn heads. So he was highly recruited by several other, ranking and future ranking gangsters in different crews. It just turned out like a matter of circumstance where he was involved with a beef with an organized crime figure, and at that point, because of the rules, he was left out in the cold, and that's it. All the made guys have to set him up, actually, even if it's his friends. So he wound up, Carmine Sessa actually, who was captain and future consigliere of the Colombos. He actually orchestrated this scenario to bring Carmine in. So Carmine didn't even realize it, that now he was associated with Carmine Sessa, and that was it. Then he was in. And then he even mentions how he frequented this popular bar on 13th Avenue called Nettie's. And it was a regular bar, so regular people could kind of go in there, but not really. But neighborhood people were in there. If you weren't from the neighborhood, you would have a hard time in there. But there was a lot of criminal activity in there. And it was low-level stuff. It was, doing some golfers. It was, errands. And then those become, as they start to recognize Carmine's capabilities, he was a very strong man. He was a good street fighter. He could take a punch. He could give it. So they found him very useful, especially with his intent. And they felt they could trust him.
And so we're kind of getting back to this point, as you're pointing out, he's got this. Not only does he have the charm, as you keep pointing out throughout the book, he's got this charm that wins over these gangsters, and mobsters. But he also, it seems like he's got this solid background that not only lures these mobsters to them, that says, hey, you know what, this guy's a stand-up guy. It kind of attracts them, but it really doesn't give him an excuse to stay with it. He's as you point out, he's got a wife and kids. Well, you could say, well, I need to earn. Well, but you could also earn in a legit job too. There's a interesting story you have in the book where he's in. I'm trying to remember the name of the Chinese restaurant where they're there for. Was it drinks that they were there for? And he was
yes.
Yeah, and he ends up getting hit with a wet rag.
Yes,
he and his date, and it ends up turning, of course, into a fight. And the place is owned by a mobster, of course, that he's not aware of, and of course he has to make amends. But it's a serious mobster that owns this place, and he doesn't mess around. And he's in big time trouble. So he's got to he gets advice from another friend who's made. And he needs to really go in there and just play it straight. And somewhere in there, he ends up getting his union card and offer for a job at an ungodly amount of money.
Yeah, that's such a great microcosm, and it gives you Carmine in a nutshell. It was Christy Tick Funerries. Owned the 19th hole on 14th Avenue, 86th Street, and he also owned the Chinese restaurant next door. And he was Christy Tick was actually one of the high-ranking wise guys who was convicted in the commission trial. Mm-hmm. So that tells you how high up he was. And I think he was just released from jail a couple of years ago at like 99 years old. Wow. But he was a pretty fierce guy. He helped incubate the bypass gang. He was mentor for Gas Pipe Casso and Vicar Musso. So he was about as dangerous as they get. So and Carmine had no idea about this, but he was on a date with his girl and his friends. And then the drunk bartender, wouldn't stop cursing and acting inappropriate. And then it turned into this wild brawl. And the next day when he got called in, he was in a room with Christy Tick and Tick's bodyguard, Carmine, and the 4 restaurant workers. And they kept gibbering at him, and he couldn't stop laughing. Even though this could have had disastrous, lethal consequences, he couldn't stop laughing. Guy takes him out of the room 3 times. He couldn't stop laughing, and then finally, at the ultimate moment, Christy Tick starts laughing. So it's these kind of things that are like you couldn't unless he told it to me, and I know it happened. It's just like it's so unbelievable. And then he was so endearing that he gave him a job. He gave him a job working on asbestos removal with a union car, which is a really plum gig in the 1980s. So yeah, it's just a great story. And we have a couple more stories like that in the book where they would say, only you, Carmine. So many people. I hear from other people, they're like, only you, Carmine, you know?
Yeah. And so it seems like, I hate to use the line from the movie, but, it's one of those things where, just when he thinks he's out, they pull him back in. He gets the easy out. He gets the, you could have this life. You could go off. You could actually become legit. You could go do something, but there's a little something pulling you back in. There's another movie too that's an interesting parallel here, and I want to bring this up with you too. There's another mobster that Carmine kind of parallels, and you bring it up in the book. And rest in peace to Ray Liotta. He played Henry Hill in Goodfellas. And Carmine kind of parallels Henry Hill in that he'll never be made because he's not pure blooded, so to speak. He is invited, however, to join a family. Can you tell us a little bit about the consequence in which Carmine has to be invited into a family?
We do go through that in the book. It's interesting that you mentioned that because a lot of their origins are so there are a lot of corollaries there. Both Italian, Irish, which was a common mix growing up. That's actually my background as well. Mm-hmm. Also, they were both valets early on. So that kind of recognition you had. Henry Hill was parking cars at the cab stand. Carmine was doing it pastels. It's that younger level. Also in these different, they were different time periods. Slightly, so they don't exactly overlap. Mm-hmm. But it's that same recruitment, because just like in any other, walk of life and profession, there was a dearth of talent, and you're always looking for a good earner, someone you could trust. So you had same thing with Henry Hill. Even though you couldn't ultimately be inducted as a made member, you could still be highly useful. And the more members you have of your crew, the stronger you are, the more earning potential you have, because it's very cutthroat kind of business. So always looking, so it's in their best interest to help groom these young men and help bring them along. There's a divergence there, as these two young men get older. Henry Hill was a murderer. Carmine was not a murderer. He never killed anyone. And that was proven out. When you go through the witness protection program, you have to admit to all of your crimes. And if there are any crimes that come up afterwards, they can invalidate the deal and then, ultimately, send you to prison. Yeah. And then there's also Henry Hill was heavily involved in narcotics trafficking. Carmine was not involved in narcotics trafficking. He was a bookmaker. He was a loan shark. He was an armed robber, a hijacker, and also he's very big with the credit card schemes. That's a very interesting subject to touch on. And ultimately, it was not that formal type of Hollywood style indoctrination. Mm-hmm. It was more of an informal kind of bringing him along until there was that moment where, Carmine Sessa brought him into his crew, and then it's official. Carmine talks about that sense of accomplishment, because he bought into it early on. He bought into this whole code. He grew up watching these guys on the Avenue. These are the tough guys. These are the guys to look up to, just because there's not that many other types of role models in the area. He talks about his father. His father had a strong influence on him, and his father was a man of integrity, and his father hated the wise guys. But I mean, you're there. You can't avoid them. So he's out on the Avenue all day. He's in the park all night. So eventually just gravitated toward by proximity. Yeah. And then became involved more and more with different crimes.
You mentioned you want to touch on some of those different crimes. I tell you what, let's do this, Craig. Let's take our break right now. When we come back, let's touch on some of the different crimes that Carmine got into, because it's really quite interesting how Carmine branches out. He doesn't stay in one lane, so to speak. He really does branch out. And it really starts with, as you mentioned, as he becomes a valet, he gets to know some of these different wise guys, and they start to notice his hustle, so to speak. And he becomes the man. He becomes the man to get to know. He starts to network from there. And then he really starts to get into getting to know these guys and start doing favors for them. And then he branches out. And some of the things that he gets into are interesting. Like you said, he never killed anybody. And I'm interested to find out why and how he avoided that. So we'll get into that when we come back. Our guest is Craig McGuire, and the book, like I said, absolutely fascinating. The book is Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys, Surviving Brooklyn's Colombo Mob. And the book was written with Carmine Imbriale. Am I saying that right? Imbriale?
Yes, Carmine Imbriale.
Imbriale, correct. And it's out by Wild Blue Press. We'll have a link for it in the description of this program. Craig, do you have a website that you want to plug with this?
My personal site, craigmcguire.com. You could check that out to see all different updates.
Okay.
And please, Wild Blue Press has a lot of great content coming out.
Okay.
Highly recommend.
So we'll send you there to wildbluepress.com for a copy of the book. Also, it's available on amazon.com. We'll have all the different links in the description of this program, so you can pick up a copy. By all means, pick up a copy of this book. I'm telling you, folks, I was riveted throughout the weekend reading this book, and you do need to pick up a copy of this book. It is fascinating. It is jam-packed. Full of stuff that you think you know the mob before you sit down and you read this book. But I'm telling you, it's fascinating, especially every mob family you think you've ever read something about is involved in this little slice of Brooklyn here in this book. So when we come back, we'll talk more with Craig McGuire about Carmine and his exploits as he's coming up through the system in Brooklyn. We'll do that when we come back. And the best in true crime podcasting, this is True Crime Tuesday. Welcome back to the best in true crime podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm Tim Dennis. Exciting program today as we're talking about Carmine Imbriale. And the book is called Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys. The author is Craig McGuire, and we will have links for the book in the description of this program. I don't know why it's hard for me to say this, Craig. wildbluepress.com. It shouldn't be that hard for me to say that. Also, there's a link to amazon.com for you to get the book as well. I'll tell you, Craig, like I said, it was engaging reading for me all weekend long. I was intrigued with Carmine's rise, so to speak. As we were talking about before the break, we were talking about how he started off as a valet, and he started to make those crucial networking. And I don't even know that networking was a thing back then. You just knew to run into one guy and another and then do favors. And it started when, as he's a valet at, was it Pastels that he was the valet
Yes.
at? Okay, so as he's a valet at Pastels, bouncers are, let's just call it as it is, glorified meatheads. They're not knowing one gangster from another, one mobster from another, and they're not knowing what position they're in. And a lot of the big ones are coming into Pastels, and they're saying, whoa, you're not on the list. Well, it's at this point Carmine's got to sort things out, and he does it in a hurry because he knows who these guys are. Well, as he's doing these favors for these guys, they're tipping big time. But it's more than just about tips for Carmine. He realizes, hey, I can get much, much more out of this. And so begins the career of Carmine, realizing, hey, I can make a pretty good living here if I play my cards right. And he's really young here. How old is Carmine when he realizes, hey, I got a future ahead of me if I play my cards right?
He was in his mid-teens. And Tim, I love the way you put it before about, this book is a slice or many slices of South Brooklyn from the era. And you touch on a point there. When you're online outside the club, these guys, whether they're maid members or just associates, or they're involved, they they're not allowed to talk about relationships. You're not allowed to, because that's basically, tipping off and giving intel on the hierarchy and how crews are structured. So you can't say that. So you had instances where you had these already violent, young men, maybe drunk online, belligerent, want to get into the club. The line's running down the block. They're not used to hearing no, so it's a very combustible situation. Carmine springs off the chair, tells the bouncer, this guy's good. You better let him in. Mm-hmm. And that happens several times. He gets noticed. He does favors. It's all about doing favors. Mm-hmm. At the same time, during the day, Carmine's got to make money. So him and several of his friends, they're sticking up pot dealers. That was a favorite pastime for them because it was easy. They're an easy mark. They're not going to go to the cops. They're usually not tough guys like him, but you can only rob so many pot deals before they see you coming. Sure, and so he needed more stable forms of income. And some of the things he gravitated to was some of these, running these errands, but then also with the football sheets, which they used to have, back in the day, low level parlay gambling. And that got him into bookmaking, low level bookmaking. But then again, that's also when you're dealing with gamblers and degenerate gamblers. I remember Carmine. He was a violent man, but he wasn't violent by nature. Mm-hmm. So he would cap the amount of the bets, or the amount that his customers would play with him. Because if you got to get $500 out of a guy, it's different if the guy owes you $10,000. Yeah. And he didn't want to hurt people. He's not cruel by nature, from what I gather. So he had that sideline. And then there was the robberies. He did a lot. He did many armed robberies, and there was some bank robberies that he was able to get in on. Those were difficult to be included on because they were higher value robberies, and you had to be brought in by some of the made guys. And a lot of these things you don't see nowadays, especially on the gambling side, and then we see credit cards. And car theft. This was right when Carmine was coming of age. They installed the VIN, vehicle identification numbers, on the cars. Mm-hmm. So that was a security measure. So they figured out you could steal the cars and then strip the VIN numbers. And then take the VIN numbers off of junk, and you got a brand new car. Yeah, legal car. So you had these, hundreds of chop shops springing up all over the city, and organized crime was heavily involved in. It was, the golden age of they called them tag jobs. Mm-hmm. And Carmine was a car thief, and there weren't the sophisticated alarm systems. So Carmine goes into detail about the tools he used, about his approach. And then we had the advent of credit cards and the rise of credit cards. And this is during a period where they had the knuckle busters, where you put the card on and you had and you ran it back. And there was no security on it. I think they put out a book a month of expired cards or stolen cars. You could theoretically call in, but there was no liability on the cards. So if someone went into a shop, used a stolen credit card, the merchant wasn't liable for the theft. The bank was. And the bank was fine with that for a long time because everyone was making so much money. You no longer had to have cash. You could use credit. So merchants were able to use more, banks could charge more fees, and then the credit card crime was just a cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. And it exploded on 13th Avenue. All the different scams that Carmine was involved with to be able to get the cards, manufacture the cards, get the numbers, get some of his customers who owed money, he would use, they would give him their cards, just all these different rackets. Now, at the same time, he's also working, maybe he has a union job for a while, or he's working at the Hunts Point Market. So he had some legitimate work. It's interestingly enough, he would say, it was a lot of criminal activity, but it was work. Every day you have to get up and you have to find that hustle. What card am I going to use today? Who am I going to rob today? What's the scam? Because just like everybody else, he's got to keep the lights on. Yeah. So this book goes through all these different slices of organized crime. So
You bring up something interesting there, Craig, in that he does say it's work. Every day you got to get up, you got to find your hustle. And it would have been easy for him to say, I can turn to drugs, I can deal drugs, it's easy money. I can get up, I can be a hired killer, it's easy money. I get up, I off a guy, it's what, 5, 10, 15 grand. And, and then I wait for my next job. What kept Carmine from getting off that daily grind, that daily hustle, and going to easier money?
We touched on it earlier. I think a lot of it's a mix of his family background, the influence of his father. He did have a stable family. He had a wife that he loves and adores to this day. He had children. He had a broad extended family. He was involved with the rackets. Once you go through that door, you become a different type of person. Mm-hmm. He was during the Third Colombo War. He was required to go with his crew in hunting parties at night, looking for them armed. So, and he was hoping that he would never have to be called upon to murder anybody. Fortunately enough, his crew chief kind of bungled everything, and they were going out in the middle of the night when nobody's out. But yeah, so he was earning enough in other areas and involved in so many different things. I think it was expected ultimately for him, but it wasn't a running prerequisite. It wasn't like you have to, go kill somebody now. And plus, remember, he wasn't going to be made. So there's not that extra level of security that they felt they needed him to prove, go kill somebody so we know. But it was swimming with sharks. There's a lot of treachery that he was involved with, especially with his crew.
Is there a difference in his business and in the reality of the mob? Is a good earner not a good killer, and vice versa? Do they separate very much? Keep that boundary there?
I think so. One of the interesting stories, he says, as he moved up from pot dealers, he started to rob bookmakers. Because there are a lot of unaffiliated bookmakers, because gambling was so rampant, and there wasn't even lotto at this point. It didn't come in for there was off-track betting, but it was all street gambling. So you had a lot of guys making money, and they weren't kicking up to anyone. So he would be able to, and he says they're usually the loudest guy in the bar, so you can pin them out 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the difference with Carmine though is Carmine knew who to call to check if this guy was legitimate. So then he would be able to, and then he would gamble with them, pay a little bit, then gamble more with them, pay a little bit, then gamble a lot with them. He had all these interesting scams going, but he was so busy and so involved in many different rackets that didn't necessarily involve, the brutality that takes to be a murderer. So I think they are different mindsets. Can they be combined in the same person? I think so. But you'll see, and I bring up the bookmakers. The bookmaker's has different skills because of his intelligence, his people skills, his way to organize money, keep it in his head, his people skills to be able to deal up the chain and with his customers. That's a different guy than a leg breaker, who's more point and shoot. So guys, kind of get specialized in there. And plus, you don't want everybody involved. If you're a captain, you want the less people involved with your murder schemes as possible. So you tend to use the same guys reliably, from what I know. Yeah,
that's true. In 1975, James Ida almost gave Carmine his first break. And gives him $1,500 to buy a suit, and kind of inferring that, hey kid, want to take you under my wing, want to get you in the easy way, want to kind of bring you into my crew. Carmine doesn't get the hint, does he?
They weren't Colombos. Joe and Jimmy Ida, eventually captains, were still operating on 13th Ave, which was fascinating because, you think about turf, the concept of turf warfare, but no, you had these guys, operating side by side from each other. Well, the Colombos were a more violent family. And Jimmy Ida was always outside. He actually had had his own storefront across the street from a shop, a variety store that his brother owns. So Carmine was always on the avenue. Jimmy took a shine to him. And like you said, he told Carmine, go clean yourself up and then let's go to dinner. And Carmine, being Carmine, he ran down to Florida. He blew the money and then he came back. And he always regretted not going with Jimmy either, because there's more of he was still a gangster, but there's more of a class and integrity and a trust there. And it proves out, how the Colombos devolved into total chaos and self-destruction. Mm-hmm. And he feels things would have went much differently. But again, life moves so fast on 13th Avenue. He just got sucked in, and before he even realized that he was aligned with under Carmine Sesses. So
now he still technically owed Jimmy Ida the $1,500. Did he ever really get it back to him? He was worried. He was worried, and he swore Jim. He's like, I'll get you the money. He never had to pay him back. Jimmy did take such a shine to Carmine, mm-hmm. He never did eventually. Interesting. There's times in the book where it seems like Carmine's playing all sides. Like even though he's not dedicated to one crew, he really is playing different crews and maybe even playing them against each other. Is there a time, and I get the idea that he is worried. He's worried for himself first, but is he ever worried about other crews? And follow me when I say this here, Craig.
Sure.
Is he ever worried about the fact that he's going to have to do business eventually with one or two crews and keep them loyal to him? Does he ever say, I favor this crew over this crew, and eventually I don't want to piss off this crew? Did he ever sit down with you and say, you know what, I was more partial to this crew, or this family and this family, and I really never wanted to cross them?
This is a very interesting subject that you touch on. I see Carmine, and this is my perspective. Again, I'm not a mob historian. Mm-hmm. I'm not a tough guy. I don't have firsthand knowledge. But from my perspective, and having spent over 2 years with Carmine, I get the sense of he was in survival mode. It was just that insanity, and the number of murders that kept, and the level of violence that he witnessed is staggering. So you see a lot of I do see it as a survival mode situation. Now, when the Third Colombo War broke out, now this was by far the most violent, dysfunctional family. This is, again, the third civil war for this family. Yeah. And it broke out in bloody fashion on the streets of Brooklyn. But this is at a time when all five families are exploding in their business. There's just so much activity going on, and business doesn't stop. So all these activities, and remember, they're so closely interwoven throughout the fabric of Brooklyn. They're all in the same clubs. They're all outside. They're all the feasts, all the gatherings, all the different gambling dens. So you have to go and you have to do business, go from bar to bar, whether you have a scheme with this guy and you're on Bath Avenue, or you with this guy in Gravesend, or 13th Avenue, 18th Avenue. You're going around. Business doesn't stop. Mm-hmm. So he has to go. And, he said at this time, remember, no cell phones. So they're all doing business with beepers and payphones. So he's switching up his beepers. He's switching up his spots. He's got to pick up his money here. And at the same time, some of his childhood friends are on different sides during the war. And there's one of his close friends when he was younger, Frankie Notch. He tells a story of, going into a bathroom and his father's in there, and he should have done something there as per the rules of the family. You're at war with this side, so something has to get done, and he let it go. And he's saying there were times where he saw some other guys and it should have been reported, but then it wasn't only Carmine. You had a lot of these guys that were switching sides, and they should have been killed for that. But they, weren't. Some of them paid those consequences. Then you had murders that were carried out that weren't family business. They were rivalries. They had to do with different captains having trying to get back at somebody. So it really didn't have anything to do with the actual war. It was just an opportunity to kill a rival. And then when that happened, Carmine had a very close friend of his murdered, Joe Brewster. And Joe Brewster was a made man, and he was very popular on 13th Avenue. And Greg Scarpa orchestrated his murder, and everybody realized what that was. That wasn't family business. That was, Greg Scarpa eliminating a rival, a threat. And that was really, it crystallized for not just Carmine, so many other guys, like, what's going on with this thing? And then you have, you're supposed to adhere to this code, and then that's when everything really started to unravel over the next, couple of years.
Yeah, when people pick up the book, they'll realize that Greg Scarpa is not what you would call the most upstanding mobster out there, and really is a polarizing figure out on the street.
He was a giant on 13th Avenue, and there were several really good books. I cite them in about Greg Scarpa. Greg Scarpa for decades was an informer for the FBI in two different periods. Most, if not all, some of the major mob trials. Mm-hmm. A lot of the wiretaps were authorized because of intelligence that Greg Scarpa, even against the own boss of his family, and his club was right across the street, the Wimpy Boys. And he did not like Carmine, and they had some run-ins, and he marked Carmine for death, one of two murder plots, the other by members of his own crew, due to jealousy and different long-running issues. Greg Scarpa was a menace, was a dangerous man on 13th Avenue, and he wanted Carmine dead.
Well, and that started over a bet, didn't it? Over a bet that he wouldn't pay off with Carmine?
There were multiple incidents. Greg Scarpa was a narcissist. He wanted complete allegiance, obedience. He wanted complete deference. And Carmine was not really the kind of guy to bend the knee. Mm-hmm. So there was going to be there was going to be some friction there. There was one instance where he beat up a young neighborhood guy. Was inappropriate to Carmine's niece. So Carmine beat the hell out of him in front of the Wimpy Boys. And Greg Scarpa didn't take that. You can't. He could beat people up in front of his club, but you can't. And then there were some. And then there was that the incident where his friend placed a large bet, and then when his friend went to pay up, Greg Scarpa's son didn't want to pay, and then they escalated. And Greg didn't want to pay. He wanted to see the money first. And it's like, that's not how it happens. If you book the bet, you have to pay. If you want to see the money, you have that conversation ahead of time. So there was that. And there were other incidents over the years that just rubbed Greg Scarpa the wrong way. And you have to think, you're taking your life in your hands, because he did murder people for slights like that in his own club. So
to me, that's crazy that, okay, here's a guy who's informing for the FBI, but at the same time, he's literally getting away with murder.
Yeah, he played both sides, and then you'll see, especially in some of these other. The names of the book escape my head, but I cite them in my book. It's really a fascinating, case study in duplicity, and how he was playing both sides. He was paid by the government bounties for certain information. Then he was getting information, and he was informing on people to get them out of the way. So any way you could, whether he killed them or they went away to prison, he still eliminated an enemy. And he did this for decades, and it was a pretty remarkable career.
And they just took him at his word. At his word. Unbelievable. So let's talk a little bit about, as Carmine starts to get a little bit into the weeds. And we won't give away too much towards the end of the book, because we want people, of course, to find out for themselves what's going on with Carmine towards the end of the book. But as Carmine gets into the weeds, so to speak, he does get marked for murder by a Colombo soldier. And Carmine's unaffiliated at this point.
Correct.
So at this point, he does need to, as we mentioned, he does need to get protection, and he gets that from Carmine Sessa, and becomes an associate of the Colombo family. Timely or the beginning of the downfall of him, do you think?
That was, and he'll be the first to admit it. That was the point where, he felt like he had achieved something. He was accepted. So remember, he was a high school dropout. He was always reaching for something, to be part of something. And finally, he was part of something. Unfortunately, over the next decade and a half, his eyes were open to, how laughably insincere that is. And later on, during the war, his protection from Carmine Sessa sort of, evaporates when Carmine Sessa's on the run. Mm-hmm. And then Carmine's younger brother was installed as captain, which he really didn't earn his stripes.
Okay.
In Carmine's eyes and in many people's eyes. And there was a big rivalry between those two. So that was one murder plot against Carmine. And then also with Greg Scarpa. And this is also at a time, so he gets taken off, Carmine gets taken off the streets, and he's facing a RICO case. So he's looking to go away for life with no real financial stability for his family. And the earlier times when he was incarcerated, they didn't step up to help him. So his family is in peril. He's facing life in prison. And then he learns that there are two unsanctioned murder plots on him. And there's a pretty provocative scene in the book where he's almost murdered. And this is right before he gets taken off the street. So when and before that, he gets the option to cooperate. I just got to think about it. Even though he doesn't believe in the code, this is a big decision to make. But it's not. They're not just going to take him on at his word. He has to wear a wire. So he has to go out on the street and he has to wear a wire, dozens of times. And his wire is actually able to get the authorization to plant a bug in a wise guy's car, Joey Ambrosino. And that bug yielded some of the most damning testimony of the war and helped authorize other wiretaps and unlock just a trove of information. He testified in half a dozen mob trials. And he really did, he helped put away, 40 wise guys.
Wow.
And he did do his part. And then he went into the witness protection program.
Wow. So sitting with Carmine for 2 years and getting to know Carmine Imbriale, is there a part of him that has ever said to you, Craig, if I had it all over to do it all over again, I would take a different route? I'd do something else? Yes. And it's very interesting, Tim. Ever since we went through this 2 years during the pandemic, mm-hmm. I was getting the calls from him in an unrestricted number because in different locations. And then you get to know him, man. There's so much material that's not in the book. We have so much because you can only fit so much in 250-page book. Okay. And then also afterwards, Carmine, now that he's in content creation mode, kind of, he's revisiting things, and he found a whole trove of information. So there's all this other great material. And then it puts you back in his perspective because we have to go over it. He didn't realize the amount of work it takes to do a book, to really the initial research and fact finding, the corroboration, and then the editing, but you get to know, man. And then especially when we're talking about his early life, and his passion was sports, and he was a very successful youth athlete. In multiple sports. I mean, he was from stickball, baseball, football, multi-sport athlete, even coaching, So he said if he had his druthers
he could see himself, a career in sports or athletics, or maybe, if it were nowadays, personal training, any of these various disciplines. He has the physique for it, the charismatic. I could see him owning his own gym on 13th Ave.
Wow. Huh. Well, that would definitely be interesting. Is there a detail that didn't make the book that was absolutely shocking that came out after the book, maybe, that you wish you would have put in the book?
That's a great question. I do know we go into, it's so fascinating because there are so many different areas of the culture that we go into. When he was a young man, and he was arrested for car theft at a time when they really slap you on the wrist. You get probation.
Yep.
They gave him the option to go to Daytop, which was drug rehabilitation camp for youth offenders, even though he was not. It wasn't a drug crime. So just that whole fascinating subculture that came. And I had several friends that went through. It was I forget. There was Daytop. There was another one who had been incarcerated, and they took that deal, or they went into the service. But really, that whole culture, is rich for exploring all the stories. And he had some pretty, galling accounts about treatment in there. I would have liked to have gone more into when he went into the witness protection program, because that was fascinating for me, because he was able to, with the strength of his family, and he was able to, and he floundered at first. It's very difficult. You don't have a high school education. Yeah. You don't have a background. It's like you're going out into the unknown, and you're ill-equipped. So how do you feel it? So he goes through a series of these jobs that are, they're pretty comedic in some of his hijinks. But then you think about how dramatic the backdrop is. He has a large family discoveries, and he eventually lands in real estate, and he's been very successful for it. So there's always that whole transition piece. But he calls me constantly. He has all these additional materials and episodes that I'd like to go dig deeper into. Maybe do a series.
That would be very interesting, especially the life after. I know with Daytop, there's the insinuation there, more than an insinuation, I'll put it that way, Craig, that there was more to Daytop than just a drug treatment program, that there was really some nefarious stuff going on there. And I agree. I think if there would just more of an investigation of what was really going on at Daytop would be interesting, really interesting, because that there was things going on there that weren't on the up and up, for lack of a better term. So I think some of those stories from there, I think he probably held out on you as to what really some of the more nefarious. I keep using the word nefarious, but that's the word that's hitting me at the time. Things that were going on there. I really do think it was a cover for other activities at the time.
I believe Carmine was better equipped to deal with that situation just because he was such a tough kid.
Yeah.
And other kids that aren't as tough and are drug addicted, I could imagine them having a much more harrowing experience. He talks about a lot of the brainwashing, and then how they would shave your head if you and make you wear a dress, and some other kind of which was supposed to be part of the program that he just wouldn't participate in. Mm-hmm. So he was supposed to they actually extended his stay, so he got stuck in there longer than he was supposed to be. Yeah, just because he wouldn't fall into line. But I agree with you. I think I think I don't know enough about it. I find it fascinating. I think whether or not they were well-intentioned or not, I think perhaps they probably did some good in some instances. I don't know enough about it, but I do know from hearing from at least from his account and some of the techniques they used on youth, especially in that vulnerable state. Is definitely worth a conversation. I don't know. Maybe that's another book there.
That is another book there. I'm not saying the entire staff at Daytop, don't get me wrong, but I think there's probably a few members of the staff that did take advantage of the vulnerability of some of the drug addicted youth that were there.
Sure.
And probably had their own little ring going on inside Daytop. And that's why I'm saying that in itself is kind of a topic that is well worth diving into. Fascinating stuff, Craig. It really is. And like I said, Carmine has such a rich story here that just when you think, well, there can't be more. And you know what? One of the things I want to ask you before we wrap up today is what do you think fueled Carmine's need for more and more hijinks and more run-ins with the law? It doesn't seem like as you go further and further down the pike here, it seems like there's this, it's this classic angel and devil on the shoulder. I want to get into trouble, but I don't want to get into too much trouble. I'm willing to commit some crime, but I don't want it to be too severe a crime. I'm willing to get my hands dirty, but not too dirty. What is it about Carmine that keeps him just this side of really being evil?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great topic. I look at we struggled with what we were going to name this book. We went through, obviously hundreds of names. Mm-hmm. And I said, we'll find the right name. We just said, let's write the book and we'll come back to it. And then it just came, Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys. So back then, when I was growing up as well, it wasn't really gangs. It was neighborhood streets. It was 13th Avenue Boys, 18th Avenue Boys, the Bath Avenue Boys. So it was like this collective identity, this tribal culture. Mm-hmm. And Carmine I see Carmine with this exuberance. He's an extrovert, he's a leader among men. He's the first one into the pitch. He's the first one. He's out in front. And I think he sees himself like that. And he doesn't see himself as a villain, even though he did some, he was involved in criminal activity. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it has to do with, and he talks a lot about his father, and he talks about integrity and loyalty. And I do see him as that. So I think that had a lot to do with, remember, Brooklyn in South Brooklyn back then it was a much different place. It wasn't black and white. When your neighbor's a bookie, when your grandparents play the numbers, when you see all this, it's easier to slide towards the other side, to slide into the dark than where it's not this sense of villainy. And, before you know it, you're in deep. Carmine's sister also said Carmine always has a strong sense to, once he's going to commit himself, he's going to commit himself and he's going to go full bore and get it done. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of this his self-identity, his wrapped up into that. Well, that's what I say. I really enjoyed working with him. I consider him a close friend. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing and amazing journey to go through for the last 2.5 years with Carmine and his wife and Tommy Dades. Really, Tommy Dades helped put us together. Tommy Dades, I was involved with a previous project. Tommy Dades is a famous New York City detective. Mm-hmm. He's the one who broke the mafia cops case. Mm-hmm. And he knew Carmine since they were young men. So, he brought, and again, nobody's making apologies here for anyone, Carmine's very, very, very blunt about that. He's not looking to be held up, put on a pedestal. Tommy either. But by the same token, the measure of the man, he is a loyal man. He's a trustworthy man. He paid his debt to society. And Tommy's another one who has some great stories. I wish he'd do a book as well. He did do a book, the Mafia Cops, mm-hmm. but a book on Tommy's life would be fascinating too. Just such great characters. So have you pitched it to Tommy, doing a book on his life? I think he was involved in a couple, and he was thinking about it, but he's a pretty busy guy. I think you had to pitch him a little harder there. I know, right? Yeah. I think you could do it, Craig. I after having read this book about Carmine's life, I think you're the guy to do it. Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. This is really a fascinating book. And folks, I want to encourage you to go out and get Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys, Surviving the Colombo Mob.
I tell you, folks, you got to get your copy today. It is the Surviving Brooklyn's Colombo Mob is the name of the subtitle there. It's by Craig McGuire with Carmine Imbriale. Folks, it is a fascinating book. It's a great read. It's one of those ones that you're not going to want to put down once you start reading it. It's really quite a fascinating read. Craig, I want to thank you for joining us today on True Crime Tuesday, and really. I'm fascinated by this screenplay you've got going on. Can you say anything about it? Or
I want to keep that under wraps, Tim.
Okay.
It's it was a minor caper. I was involved with some of my friends in the late '80s. Mm-hmm. That's really going to turn some heads because it had a lot of twists and turns. And, we're working on that in the background.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I just want to thank the folks at Wild Blue Press.
Sure.
Mike, Steve, Ashley, Kelsey, just fantastic people. There's something exciting going on at Wild Blue Press. I encourage you to look at their titles, especially if you like true crime. Also, my wonderful wife with me with all my craziness and my sons. And just everybody who bought the book. I really appreciate it. Help me do what I love. And thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
You're very welcome, Craig. And it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure, Craig. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and it was my pleasure to sit down and read it. And much continued success with the book. I know it's already been doing well, but we want to encourage our audience to go out and buy more copies. That's for sure.
Yes.
That's for sure. All right, it's that time where if you're listening to the free version of the show, we must bid you adieu. But if you don't want to leave us right now, you don't necessarily have to. What you can do is you can go to Stitcher.com, click on the subscribe button under Stitcher Premium. That will get you to listen to Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals. That'll get you to listen to the ad-free version of Darkness Radio. And that'll get you to listen to hundreds of podcasts ad-free and expand your audio horizons more than you could possibly ever imagine. And the best thing is you can do it for just $5 a month. Do it right now. Go to Stitcher.com, click on that premium button, subscribe to Stitcher Premium for just $5 a month. You'll get Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals as far as True Crime Tuesday. You'll get an ad-free Darkness Radio. And of course, you'll get hundreds of podcasts ad-free and expand those audio horizons. Go ahead and do it today.